So for your final project, you're going to submit a concept map. This is a tool for studying that often people use, and you're going to do this as your final exam, essentially. So these are the components. So the main visual piece is the map itself. It consists of bubbles like these, and arrows connecting those bubbles. So like this one, and this one. So for yours, you will include a concept in each bubble along with a short explanation. You don't have to say a whole lot in these explanations, just something simple like this. And the arrows need to be labeled, right? So you can see each one of these are labeled. Okay, so the map itself consists of bubbles with concepts and their definitions, and arrows which are labeled and connect concepts that should be connected. Okay. Along with the map, you should have an appendix. So this is the meat of the project. So for each arrow, you're going to include this little tidbit in the appendix. So for example, we have an arrow here between limits and derivatives. I've labeled it as 1. So you can see here, I've labeled this again as 1. I give a brief explanation about the connection between limits and derivatives, and then I give an example that illustrates that connection. Okay. You can see the same thing again here for the second arrow that I drew on that map, connecting derivatives and L'Hopital's rule. So we have an explanation along with an example. And then the last example, I had an arrow connecting derivatives and the product rule. Here's an explanation and then an example as well. So one thing we should talk about is what not to do, so what things you should avoid. So you should avoid some of these things. So for example, you don't want to have bubbles that are completely disconnected. Right? So any bubble that you draw should be connected to at least one other thing. It can be connected to multiple things. So for example, derivatives here is connected to a whole lot of things. So it can be connected to a lot of things, but it doesn't have to be. And you have to be connected to at least one other thing, right? So maybe we could connect L'Hopital's rule to limits, okay? Since there's limits in L'Hopital's rule. Another thing you want to avoid is having bubbles with no explanations. So here I've written quotient rule, but not really said anything more about it. You also want to avoid having arrows that don't have any sort of a label, because that'll make it hard for the reader of the map to be able to see what this connection actually is. In the appendix, you want to avoid having any big missing pieces. So for example, in the connection between limits and derivatives, it's great to give an explanation, but you should definitely include an example. You might also feel like just giving an example with no explanation. You should give something, even if it's a little bit short, but there should be some explanation about the connection itself.